Hey everybody, this is Javi, and you're listening and watching the Inner Child Collective, where you and your inner child heal for the better. Welcome and hello. Today we have a guest here, a really, really cool person. We have been friends for a while, like since 2016.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so before we get started, if y'all have any questions or comments that you would like to post later on, by all means, you can let me know by like putting it in the comments where I post this. And also, if you have any questions for a Fire Angel, like by all means, like reach out to them as well. They're on Facebook. You're on Instagram.
Instagram, Facebook.
So, and also for those who do not know me, I'm a psychic and medium and author who specializes in inner child therapy, and I put a whole emphasis on generational and historical trauma. We are affected as children, and how we can rewrite those stories by decolonizing our minds, right? By unlearning a lot of what is in our subconscious mind. And so that's all about me. We have a guest here. So, Fiyah Angel is a Black, queer, non binary artist and author and activist, right? Whose work focuses on Black liberation. Using root work and their ancestral connections, they emphasize the importance of doing shadow work in order to liberate ourselves, to break generational and historical trauma ties, and to heal from centuries of spiritual, psychological, and political oppression. So they're currently working at the Radical Well-Being Center in the state of Michigan, and they're doing a lot of great work there. Hello.
Hello.
You're a warm welcome to Fire Angel. Thank you for being on. I really appreciate it. It's like you glowed up. Like I remember back in 2016 when you talked about this in a video, like you had like this post where you talked about all women, are to be protected, right?
Mm-hmm.
All Black women are to be protected
Yes.
regardless of where they are. And I definitely want to ask about that, um like shortly, because your politics have kind of like shifted over the years. But we're going to be
Oh yeah.
yeah, like we're going to be, excuse me, talking about stuff, including that. So like, I also know that you have been doing shadow work very recently, and that's a huge part of your healing process. And so you talk a lot about this in your videos, and I would like you to explain like what is shadow work and what that entails for you.
I feel like every time I answer this question, I give a different answer. And if folks look it up, you will find many, many different answers. But for where from where I'm sitting today, I could say that shadow work is that process of going deep into ourselves, looking deep into our trauma, and finding out the information and the wisdom and the knowledge that is in that darkness, in those dark places.
Right,
Those parts of our identity, shadow work deals with those parts of our identity that we push away, that we don't want to see ourselves, or we don't want others to see. Shadow work walks us through the process of identifying those things, dealing with those things, accepting parts of ourselves, and integrating those parts we pushed away into the, so that we can be more aware of how we're showing up, so that
right,
we can be more aware of like how we're interacting with others, and how we deal with ourselves.
right. I feel like that's a very important thing to say too. Like looking at the self, you know, in order to see how we're not only showing up for ourselves but showing up for the world, because like the generic definition of shadow work is about show and like looking at the things about yourself that you don't like, but they never talk about other people and how your behavior like affects like other people. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
so like that's something to really think about, especially it's not just about working on your own trauma. It's definitely you're working with other people, showing up for other people, um, how you are going to, like, especially if you're doing like spiritual work, how you're going to show,
Yes.
you know what I mean? There's way
Yes.
people out here just fronting
Mm-hmm.
on so many.
Yeah. And that was another reason that doing this work, this shadow work, was so important to me when I really started um, going into having like individual relationships with people and wanting to do like healing work with folks and be in those types of spaces and doing that serious work with folks. I wanted to make sure that when I was doing vulnerable work with people, that I could handle it and not cause harm. And if I did cause harm, I could deal with myself. You see what I'm
Mhm.
saying? It was just really important for me to heal
Right,
so that I could take these walks with folks,
right, right, right.
you know.
Did you feel like you were that that was your calling to do so? Like, when did you like decided to, like, you know what, I have a bigger purpose, therefore I'm going to get myself together in order to fulfill that purpose?
Yeah, I want to say, well, you know, around the time when we met in 2016, I think I was starting to see that there was more out there, but I just hadn't got there yet.
Right,
So it was really also removing the barriers to even access this type of healing work. That was a part of it too, you know, being deeply marginalized, being a very oppressed person. Healing resources and resources for transformation aren't just offered up for us. So even in that, it was something that I had to fight to get at that time. I
right,
knew it was happening. I knew people were doing this work. I was seeing people move, and
right,
I knew I felt stuck. So I just started really grasping for opportunities where I could find them, reading whatever I could read, and aligning myself and opening myself towards the possibilities. And eventually, I started to get teachers and mentors and opportunities that were supportive of what I was trying to do, and people who did shadow work and spirit work with me.
right. So,
Yeah.
so where were you able to find those resources? Like you said that you opened up, you know, yourself because you were willing to learn, right?
Mm-hmm.
When did you like when did all those folks start to come to you? When did you start seeing those resources? Because, and the reason why I'm asking is because there is like this mentality, especially among colonized and marginalized people, that help is not available to us because of the system that we're working in. We don't have time to do it,
Mm-hmm.
because of all these barriers that are, what I've noticed, are very psychological in nature and also like emotional in nature.
Yes.
Who want to change but do not know where to go to do that. So where would you now? When did you like started to see that you like have the power to find those resources?
Yeah, I went back to early reflections on books that I was given early in childhood. My aunt Bunny, she always was, you know, this was in the 80s, before there were a lot of conversation about Black folks, especially like poor Black queer folk, going to therapy. And she was already on this. And I would find these books in her room. And even though I was a kid, I was really drawn to them. And as I started going through all of the things in life and was looking for healing resources, I returned to those early books that I found in my aunt's room when I was a kid. So that was a part of it. And then I started to get these anonymous messages in my email from a group. I At the time I didn't know. I assumed it was a group because they used we language, and they were anonymous messages, and they were spiritual in nature, shadow work in nature, addressing the harms that had happened to me. I felt like I was being spiritually spied on by these messages. Like, how did you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I reached out and I'm like, who are you? And they were like, we can't tell you yet, but we've seen you on the internet. We've seen you be a soldier. We've seen you be a warrior. And we figured you could use some pouring into. And I was in a very, very low point. I was in a very low point, very much vibrating in a death zone. And every day these messages came to my inbox. And even though I didn't know who these people were, I trusted what was happening. And it was literally raising my vibration day by day. Just a
Mm-hmm.
little. I could feel it. And before I knew it, I was in a situation where I was like accessing these rituals every day through this platform, through this email platform. And it was very helpful to me. And I can tell you today, it's been 2 years since I've been getting those messages,
Mm-hmm.
and it has changed my life. Connecting us back to ancestral rituals, the technology that indigenous people, displaced indigenous people have been cut off from, being cut off from our people and our land and our ritual to correct when these traumas happen to us, there are answers, but we don't have them. So this is what this experience did for me. It reconnected me to ancestral technologies and helped me see the magic I do every day.
So what do you mean by like ancestral technologies? Because I know that you said that on your bio on your website. So it's like, could you explain to me what that is?
Yeah, I'm really talking about a blend of tradition,
Okay.
ancestral traditions that we've had, musical practices, medicine practices, all of those things that our ancestors developed, they are technologies. If we look at them that way and apply them that way, like even what you're doing with the inner child, that is a technology. That is reading the storytelling. That is a healing technology. And I think that for some of us, it's helpful to look at it that way. When we understand, we may be able to make that connection to how these things can be used to transform us at a cell level.
Can we please talk about like further like the technology and how it's very much accessible to us, and a lot of folks don't know like what they're doing every day, like even if they don't call it like ancestral work, is ancestral work when you tell a story, when you
Yes.
care, when you cooking breakfast, like a lot of like I feel like a lot of black folks are to know like we are magical, like especially
Yes.
non-binary or trans or whatnot,
Yes.
like do your work, because I also saw that you were a death doula and an ordained minister. Through your work, how are you, and I see that as honoring life and death,
Mm-hmm.
is how are you able to incorporate ancestral work and shadow work into that role, and how are you able to help people like as a death doula and a ordained minister do their own shadow work and their own ancestral work?
Yeah, it's
Please,
it's
if you can.
very it's very much about, through doing my shadow work and really studying this, it helps me to see where people are
Mhm.
and what those shadows are doing. When I see those shadows come up in people, what those shadows are doing, what they want, you know, and how to navigate them with, while still treating that person and honoring them as sacred, right? So that's the key. I go into that work able to see the sacredness in the
Mhm.
people that I work with. So it doesn't matter what shadows they're bringing. I'm gonna protect myself because of my shadow work. I know how to protect myself and set boundaries. I know how to address it when I've been violated, and at the same time, I could put that in practice with others. So when I'm doing the death work or ceremonial work, it really is freeing those shadows. Some of the rituals that we do, some of the affirmations that we repeat back and forth is doing the shadow work. The way we use music in ceremony, the way we use chanting, ancestral altars, this type of thing. So I hope that answered your question
No,
about how
it
it
definitely,
shows up.
yeah, it definitely answered my question. It definitely answered my question because I was often wondering, like I said, it was a bridge between life and like life and death. You know what I mean? And so when you're thinking about, I guess like as you get older, you start thinking about those things more often than not, and how type of legacy you're going to lead, whether you are here for a particular, like, for a long time, and you
Mm-hmm.
your purpose or whatnot, and you're on, literally your body is giving out on you, and you're thinking like, what type of legacy am I leading? Did I live my life to the fullest? Did I have the opportunity, or give myself the opportunity to forgive, those who have hurt me, especially
Right.
like like and you begin to question a lot of things while you're in. And I was wondering, like, do you see yourself asking yourself those questions about yourself while you're doing this work?
I do. And I often I think about, walking with people through the process of death and how what that looks like for oppressed people, how we don't you think about things like death with dignity. Like that's not something that is often afforded to oppressed and marginalized bodies. We often die violently or suddenly or without the proper care. So a part of this work too is showing up in late in life or at the end of life and saying, hey, I'm gonna sit here with you and honor the life that you lived, whatever it was. And we're gonna walk up here together to this gate. And being also sure that there's space for it's really important for me to work with the families too, or the caregivers, whoever is community for that individual,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't get a chance to grieve either. We're just moving from crisis to crisis very often, and not really not the system doesn't give us the opportunity to grieve and deal with our loss, and we just generationally have not. So also this is about like changing the culture around death in our
Right,
communities and
right,
that shadow.
right. That's important work, because a lot of us, when we, especially during like these days with Black Lives Matter and like all the political stuff that's going on in the election, a lot of people are thinking about these marginalized and colonized people are often thinking about death, um, at whatever, regardless of the age. And it's like
Yeah.
there's this fear around dying, because we really do not. I really do believe, like, for one, a lot of people are questioning like whether or not they'll live long enough to leave a legacy. It's
Right.
like this is an oppressive death. Like, we did not ask for this. You know what I mean? And so, like, it does bring me to the question in regards to your radical politics, because again, they did change over the years, even more so since you've, like, started your spiritual journey. So I was wondering,
Hmm.
do you find yourself redefining your political ideologies all the time? Like, once you, especially since you started doing shadow work and healing, because that takes a lot,
Yeah,
to navigate,
it
especially
does.
in the thick of activism.
Yeah. And there's a couple of levels to it, right? There's things that I've said from a less evolved place or from just a place where I was flat out wrong and it just doesn't need to be repeated. But it can continue to be a testament to growth and transformation. There are other things that I look back on and they just aren't where I am anymore, but I think they still serve a purpose for where folks are who come into contact with that information, if that makes sense.
No.
There's levels to it. There's level to it. So I think I think about the transformation of my politics, and I think some things have really stood the test of time, and they're still really good, like 101 or introductory thoughts. And then there's some places where I see a lot more advancement and radicalization. Obviously, when I had when I started doing those posts years ago and they started going viral, it gave me access to different communities and social media that gave me the correct language for what the things I wanted to say, for the
Mhm.
ways that I wanted to address all the various genders. At that time, I
Right, right,
didn't
right.
know some of the terminology that's out here today. And I'm so grateful for the way Black trans folk and Black queer folk continue to innovate language
Mm-hmm.
and give us space to exist with the words. But yeah, the shadow work has definitely radicalized my politics. I'm not, and also changed the way I address people. But it's definitely more at a level of spirit, definitely more at a level of, I'm not as much as a separatist as I used to be. I'm definitely learning how to build multicultural communities for a bunch of different reasons. And that has separated me from some of the groups that I was a part of in the past. Even though we still agree about Black liberation overall, we may not agree about what kind of communities we want to exist in, you
Right,
know?
and that makes sense, and that actually brings up a good point about change and allowing yourself to change, like during the healing process, because doing like shadow work, especially when it comes to like looking like inner child energy work and looking at your past, like you start to realize that how much you've grown and how much you've changed and how much you're not that person anymore.
Right.
Right? And I know that you said something about like in your latest video how you had to say goodbye to Fiyah Angela. So I was wondering, like, how did that go? And do you find yourself like, does she come up every once in a while, or do you like went through the whole ritual of saying like, look, you can rest now, you do not have to go.
Yeah. Yes, definitely did. It was a hard adjustment when I realized that that is what was happening. And it was interesting because like it was right around the time that I popped up in a reading of yours and you reached out to me and was like, "Yo, you are having a spiritual transformation." And I was like, "Yeah." And it was happening and it was so intense. And when I first came out of it, I was like, I started seeing differences between who I was and what Fiyah Angelo was. And I started seeing that I was going to have to find a way to say goodbye to this period of art, to this period of work, to this period of community. And it took me a while. And people close to me, when I told them, I was like, I'm thinking about changing my name and changing my whole everything. And they were like, yeah, it makes sense. I can see it. I can feel it. It almost feels like going from being a senior to being a first timer of, a new student again. Like
Right,
Fiyah Angelo had reached the peak of their work. They completed their work. And like I was saying in the video the other day, I looked up, at one time Fiyah was like a lone soldier of a few. And then I looked up one day and there were so many carrying the message. And I was like, I don't have to bang this point out anymore. It's been passed on, and here come people with fresh energy, fresh ideas, fresh ways to get this out. It's time for me to move on. So
right,
I definitely did a ceremony. Fiyah Angelo is resting, is retired, is enjoying the freedom, and I am growing into Fiyah Angel. I still have not completely filled these shoes. I am excited about what this transformation is going to be. I'm also afraid in a way, but I'm not going to let the fear prohibit this. I will not I will not resist transformation, you know?
right. And I get it. And it's like I'm glad that you said something about it because now it makes sense for me as well. Like there are certain parts of myself, of my old self, that I'm not the same person. You know what I mean? And I find that um the person I used to be is definitely different from who I am today. And I'm still like, even though like I have, of course, I have no reason to hate myself as a trans person. Like my life is a lot better because of it. But I also know that there's still work to do, like as far as who I used to be, right?
Hmm.
Still there, like she's still there.
Oh yeah.
And so it's like and I get that um that need to transform and that call for transformation. It is to happen in order for us to grow. It's it's like it's really hard.
It is.
It's really hard.
It is. And as I become more aware, so again, with that transformation and with some of those remnants, it comes up to me sometimes where I see like I still see places where I'm very guarded. I still see places where I'm afraid, and it shows up, and it tries to prevent certain things from coming into my life. I see where it was me, I see where I owe apologies. I see where I owe amends.
Mm-hmm.
I see where I need to say nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And sitting with that has been something. I was just simply sitting in the parking lot today, and I was thinking about someone that I wronged, that I haven't spoken to in a long time. And I just silently just sat there and sent out the message like, I'm so sorry. I was so sick. I'm so sorry I did that to you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that's the thing too, you coming to terms with that, and how like bad things happen to us, and it also created situations where we did bad things too.
Yeah, like we have to be aware of our own toxicity. And I feel
Yeah.
you're going through the healing process, part of shadow work is seeing how you like not only how people have done you wrong, but basically your part in what you've done to somebody else. And
Yeah.
the hardest part of shadow work is just realizing that you or just because you have gone through trauma doesn't mean you get to be an asshole. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not giving
Right.
you
Yeah.
the wiggle room to do that.
Yeah. And it's helped me have a different, like, it has also helped me have, to some extent, a different view of the people who have wronged me. In some cases, it's just like flat out inexcusable. And then there's other cases, in like you talk about with the inner child healing work. I'm thinking about like, I'm starting to see ways where I'm grateful for my father, even though trauma, but I'm starting to see the places where he did something no one else could do. The places where he was his true self and he really showed up as my dad. And I've been able to integrate that for my inner child. And I often feel in some ways that heals that other person too.
Mm-hmm.
Energetically, we're so connected. And when we do this work, when we free ourselves, we really do free up other people,
Right.
you know.
Right, because there isn't that feeling that or to placate to us or like take care of us emotionally because we are able to do that ourselves and also see that there are people, with all kinds of stuff. You know what I mean?
Right.
And the world we start to realize that the world does not revolve around us and our trauma. You
Right.
start to
Right.
realize that when we go through this whole thing. And it's
Yeah.
uncomfortable because at least I can speak for myself and other folks for what I've seen in myself, like a lot of people with trauma, like a lot of us are wounded. We are wounded inner children.
Hmm.
And when we are wounded like that, everything is revolved around us.
Right.
Around the pain and the suffering. And then we go through the process of healing and then we remember like or we start to realize like, look, not only did we cause harm by doing that to ourselves, but we cause harm to other people when we expect them to revolve around our anger.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So that like what you are saying like makes perfect sense in regards to how you see yourself and how you see your father now. Um and speaking of children, like I know that in another video you talked a little bit about your relationship with your children changing because of the work you began to do. And I was wondering like how are they able to relate to you now that
Oh,
you have gone through this and how are you able to like relate to your children?
it's so cool because like I'm teaching them shadow work. So they're doing their shadow work too. And it's such a gift for them to have at this age. My daughter is 15, and she was talking about where she's vibrating right now. And she was saying, wow, I'm kind of where you were a few years ago. If I keep this up, imagine what I can experience in my life. having, you know, access to this technology so early in life. And so there's that part where I feel like it's giving them hope for the future because they have a tool that they can use. Also, just the way we interact, it is no longer the structure that we've been passed down to practice through oppression. We're no longer fighting for the nuclear family model. We're no longer fighting for that. So that removes energy. That's a refund of energy that we get back. We're no longer, you know, fighting to be seen as respectable in the community. We are recognizing the strengths of each other, what each person brings to the house, how we can live comfortably together. Even just things like discussing chores. It doesn't have to get to a point of get in here and clean this. No, no, no. Not to say I don't yell, not to say we don't yell, not to say that doesn't happen, but it's a conversation of I am working really hard to keep the energy clear here so that we can be comfortable. You have dreams, you are asking for things, and we have shown each other and ourselves that we can manifest. We can call down what we need. And in order to do that, we need a clean space. Will you help me?
Right, 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 right.
Yeah. So that too, you know, they've been able to see their own magic, and each person has. So it gives us an identity beyond these roles we've been trying to play. You don't have to be son. You don't have to be daughter. I don't have to be mama. We can be our true selves in this house and function.
Right.
So yeah, I'm really looking forward to, you know, growing with them now. It's such a different parenting experience because of shadow work.
Yeah, I feel like it's a radical act to like allow your children to be themselves, their authentic selves, because
Mm-hmm.
of our families, unfortunately, how do they feed into this role that has been placed upon us by white supremacy. And so
Mm-hmm.
they, as a result of that, like a lot of what we have gone through has been passed from one generation to the next, and there's historical and generational trauma attached to that. And so what we are taught as children, we end up passing it on to our kids just simply because that's the message, that's the norm that we have received. And to break that cycle and to allow that, you know, that joy and that peace to be in your house, right? And it comes from you. And now your kids are going to transfer that. And so now as a result, they're not going to be somebody else's trauma story. Now,
Exactly. Exactly. And that feels really good. And it is that thing where we've been passed down these things and we never question them. You know, the idea of ownership of children. I
mm-hmm,
don't like the legal system. This system is set up in a way that that gives ownership of parents in a way that is undue. They don't belong to me. And by doing that, it also makes parents have to suffer all of the responsibility, all of the financial costs. And this again makes loads very heavy, which is why for Black solo parents, particularly Black solo moms, this is going to produce a big shadow. This is going to produce a lot of trauma and a lot of burden for this person to carry on their own. So when I think about that, it doesn't surprise me if people didn't experience me well. My load was so heavy and society was saying it had to be. But once
mm-hmm,
I started going, wait, I don't own y'all. I'm going to follow the rules and do the legal stuff they say I have to do, but I'm also going to give you your identity. I'm not going to carry that. I'm not going to force and shape you into something they said you should be. Carry you. Who are you? Let's explore that. And
right.
and that made my load lighter. Giving my kids their identities back and giving them responsibility for themselves in the ways that are needed. And also opening up to help, to having other community members being able to step in and say, well, hey, I can take this. I can join in. So it's been opening.
I was wondering, like, speaking of which, and you probably answered this question before, so if you did, by all means, forgive me, right? So, you mentioned like Black solo mothers, right? how are you able to, especially during the time of COVID, right? How are you able to reach out to Black solo mothers, and still like as far as like doing shadow ancestral work, while also like protecting yourself and protecting your energy so you don't get burned out?
Yeah, I just got back from like a week break. I just took a week break. I have slots. I try to make it where I can work with at least 5 Black mages a month
Mm,
and set aside an hour a week for each of them. And so that's how I've been connecting during COVID and just like doing shadow work, doing Reiki sessions, doing tarot sessions, teaching how to do those things, how to do divinations for yourself, teaching how to do Reiki. I'm gonna be doing that soon too, in not a gatekeepy kind of way either. I've been doing that, and yeah, taking breaks, resting, studying, watching other healers, learning, taking classes, trying to stay on top of my spiritual baths, my medicines, taking my medicines. I'm really getting into tinctures and elixirs. I investing in my pleasure and being unapologetic about that. I'm really diving into pleasure and bliss, really studying those things. I have so much experience in lack. I have so much experience in scarcity and suffering that I am eager to become an expert in pleasure and bliss. Um, so that has been a part of it too. And just really, it really doesn't have to be balanced for me, because now I'm at a point where this is like integrated into my life. This is Fire Angel. This is what I do. I do healing work and I rest. I do healing work and I study. That type of thing.
nice. So it is like time to take a break.
Okay.
And so we'll be right back with the second portion of the podcast with Fire Angel, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned. Hey, everybody, this is Javi. Welcome back. This is the audio and visual version of the Inner Child Collective podcast. And we have Fire Angel here, and we were having a really good conversation about healing and inner child work and shadow work. And so, speaking of which, um, you are also an author, right?
Yes.
And you have a couple of books out, God's Junk Drawer, Junk. Let me say that one more time. God's Junk Drawer and Poems from My Baby Daddy. And you're also working with or working on another book. So could you tell me a little bit about your writing projects and how that helps you, with shadow work? Because I feel like we talked about before, um, writing is important. Shadow or like stories and telling your stories is part of shadow work, right?
Yes.
Extremely important. So how does that work for you as far as like writing and things of that nature?
Yeah, writing is so different for me now. Like you were saying, with this transformation, it changes a lot, and it's changed my writing. It's changed my writing, and it's changed my writing process. And I'm going into it a lot more aware of the power that my words carry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going into it a lot more clear about what I want my message to be. God's Junk Drawer was my first book, and it was an anthology of poems that I wrote over a 10-year period. Some from 15 years made it in there, but it was called God's Junk Drawer because it was just this array of pieces that I had no organization or form to, other than they were from my life. So I just got them all together and put them in a book. Poems from My Baby Daddy is literally a collection of poems from my baby daddy that I put in a book in order to collect some financial reparations. And some of the pieces that I wrote with him, because I also wanted to speak to like how often as artists we end up doing work with our abusers, and how that shows up, and how I was abusive to others with my work at that time. And now it is about speaking about transformation, very much so. The work process is very much guided by my ancestors. It's guided by my spiritual team, waking me up early some mornings, early, much earlier than I want to get up to write, or making me push past my blocks, those limiting beliefs, those fears. So I'm really excited about this next book because it's going to be coming from a lot more intentional place, a much more centered place, a much more grounded place. And with what I've been able to do in the past without these tools, I'm very excited for what my work will look like now that I have them.
I was wondering whether or not, how far along are you with this new book and what does that entail? Like, especially when you are guided by your ancestors.
Yeah, it's a slow process right now. I'm really working with like rough drafts and like those ideas I'm afraid to share, like pushing past that. Like, can I really say this? Can I really talk about this? That type of thing. I feel like I will, like right now it's kind of slow, but I feel like it's gonna end up being like a process where it just starts coming together, and before you know it, all the stories are there.
Mm.
So it'll be a collection of short stories, some fiction, and it will also probably be some poetry too.
Yeah, like I find it very important to recognize the power of words, especially if you're going through like the healing process, because for so long we have used words to pretty much hex ourselves, and hex ourselves
Hmm.
on a subconscious level. And because of those messages that we have received, like have been passed down from one generation to the next, it just seems like those are the words that define us, especially when we're children, right? We
Hmm.
hang on to those words. So the fact that you are able to like twist that around, right? And use that to empower yourself. And, I find that to be the most, like, I just find that to be very, powerful is not a word to like, to tag onto this. Like, it's way more than that. It's liberating.
Yeah,
It,
yeah,
it's a form of freedom to use those words to empower yourself and to empower others and to liberate yourself. So I was like, so you like, did your ancestors like place it in your mind to write this book and say like, look, you got to do this. You know what I mean? Okay.
yeah. It's very much like that. It's very much. I feel them having a grip on wanting to use me to say certain things or move certain things, and to allow that to happen and trust it. And it's very difficult with a history of mental illness sometimes to explore that part. It feels very scary, and for a reason, I feel like the stigmas put in place are very intentional to stop us from going into being guided by ancestors and spirit and that. So that's something I'm often pushing past to get to, like, no, this is happening. Y'all are really here leaving messages in my dreams. You are really here sending me tools and guidance and affirmation, confirmation that this is real.
Right. So I was wondering, like, do you find, because a lot of authors, especially like those who are like very much connected to like maybe their former self or the stories of their former self, find themselves like hearing voices, of their old former self or their inner child come through saying like, look, I also have a story as well. I know that happens for me. Does that happen for you as well? Like as far as your inner child or maybe Father Angela coming through and saying like, look, I still have a story.
Yes, it does. And sometimes, um, that deep inner child will come through, that 8-year-old me who was the first version of myself to write. That person will come through, and the ritual that I established at 8 or 9 when I started writing is very much still in place. Like, I still prefer writing with a pencil and paper for at least my first draft or getting ideas down. So there are these ways where my inner child shows up and either tells the story or tells me how to write it. um my inner teen, I love that you were talking about that. My inner teen will show up and say, hey, you have the wisdom and grace to like tell these stories now and see how they connect to where you are now. And So yeah, very much so. Fire Angelo has stories, and some are very recent. From as recent as 2 years ago. And I do find sometimes with the more recent stories that I am waiting to do more shadow work on them now, so that I do have the wisdom, the insight, and the tools to really see what was happening there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know that you said something about not moving until spirit says to move. And I was wondering, like, is that true for your shadow work and your healing work as well, where you tell you to do something you're not comfortable with, or or you like to do something, because you feel some sense of urgency, and they're like, no, not yet.
Yeah. Yeah. That's hard. And it does happen. I sometimes get pushes to act and or to move or to create or to speak or not to speak. And I have found that when I follow that, it may not go the way I imagined it, but it goes for my highest good.
Mm-hmm.
And when I don't follow it, it does not go for my highest good. Like, so ignoring those voices, ignoring spirit will put me right back where I was, because I couldn't hear it or I didn't recognize it. So in order to keep going, I have to keep trusting that voice in me and listening to that guidance of when not being moved by other people's goals or objectives, not being moved by the goals of capitalism, being moved because it is so for me to do so.
All right.
Yeah.
So, another question, and then like we're pretty much done. I was wondering, like, what words of wisdom do you have for those interested in doing shadow work to go through the healing process?
Yeah, I will say this too, like, uh, avoiding getting caught in those healing traps, where because healing does pay off and you do see growth, but sometimes we'll just get caught in a cycle where we're just constantly looking for things to heal and healing and healing and healing. And the purpose of this is also to, like, live your life. It's also to exist. It's also to create. So don't get caught in the trap of feeling like you have to fix everything right away. You don't. That's not fair to you. You still need room to experience and to grow. Um, take on the work that you have the capacity for. Um, and doing more shadow work will help us realize that, right? But not diving in deeper than we need to. Sometimes I think about that when I'm about to begin an exercise. I think about what I have to,
Oh,
what's coming for me so that I'm in a good point. Also, set aside set aside time to journal. Journaling is a very important part of shadow work. Writing or recording your thoughts and your observations of the world is very important in the work. And I would say too, like, don't resist transformation. It's worth it. It's You owe it to yourself. This is for you.
thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And your wisdom. Thank you so much for that. Um,
Yeah.
where can listeners and viewers find you? Um, if they have questions about your work or questions about your spiritual practices and things of that nature.
Yes, you can find me on Facebook at Fire Angel. You can messenger me on there, if you want to reach out and connect. Also, you can DM me, message me, or follow me on Instagram at the Fire Angel, and that's a good place to reach me. You can follow me on patreon.com/the tower. I am working on some things there, and pretty soon YouTube. You can subscribe to me on YouTube at Fire Angel. We'll be doing the parable of the sower deep dives for those who
Nice.
are interested in that. So please be looking out for that very soon.
All right. So thank you again for that. And all that information will be in the description. And so you'll be able to find it very, very easily. And also, if you would like to know more about me or have any questions for me, you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, now TikTok, um, and Instagram. And I believe I said Facebook. Um, Also, you can, if you are interested in the podcast, you can also find me on Anchor, iTunes, and I will also have that information on there. In fact, it's on Anchor, and all the other ones that you can go to listen. Also, if you would like a more in-depth reading, because I do inner child archetype readings and give all kinds of services, everything from bedtime stories to readings, you can go to my website, the Inner Child Collective, and yeah, Inner Child Collective and .com, and there's a service page. You can go there and get it, get it together as far as like making an appointment.
Yes.
So um, thank you so much for listening and watching. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Fiyah, for being here. I really appreciate all of your energy and all of your kindness. You know what I mean? Seriously. Um,
Thank you.
so we gotta get out of here. And so till next time, peace. See y'all later.
Bye.